A man came to me with fabulous paintings. Jim Cowan, the publisher at Morpheus, for whom I had done an introduction to the H.R. Giger book, came to me and he said, I've come upon a little Polish artist named Jacek Jurka. Lives with his family in the woods, and he paints. And they're wonderful paintings, and I'm going to do a book of them, 30 of them. Will you do the introduction? And I said, I'm up to here with doing introductions. I'm really tired of it. And then I said, let me look at the paintings, and he let me look at them. And they took my breath away. They seemed to me to be an astonishing meld of Magritte and Dali and dreamers and surrealists down through the years. And I said to Jim Cowan, no, I won't do an introduction, but I will write one story around each painting. One of these little paintings I called Susan, and I wrote it about my wife and about my marriage. I'm going to read you a story. The story is from Mindfields. You'll see the illustration around which I wrote the story, and the story, like my wife's name, is called Susan. As she had done every night since they had met, she went in bare feet in a cantaloupe meat-colored night shift to the shore of the Sea of Mist, the verge of the ocean of smothering vapor, the edge of the bewildering haze he called the brim of obscurity. Though they spent all of their daytime together, at night he chose to sleep alone in a lumpy Volkswagen-shaped bed at the southernmost boundary of the absolutely lovely forest in which their home had been constructed. There, at the border between the verdant woods and the brim of obscurity that stretched on forever, a sea of fog that roiled and swirled itself into small, murmuring vortexes from which depths one could occasionally hear something like a human voice pleading for absolution, or at least a back-scratcher to relieve this awful itch. He had made his bed, and there, with the nightlight from his old nursery, and his old vacuum tube radio that played nothing but big band dance music from the 1920s, and a few favorite books, and a little fresh fruit he had picked on his way from the house to his resting place, he slept peacefully every night, except for the nightmares, of course. And as she had done every night for the 8 years since they had met, she went barefoot and charmed down to the edge of the sea of fog to kiss him good night. That was their ritual. That was their rite. Before he had even proposed marriage, he explained to her the nature of the problem. Well, the curse, really. Not so much a problem, because a problem was easy to reconcile. Just trim a little nub off here, just smooth that plane over there, just let this bit dangle here, and it'll all meet in the center. No, it wasn't barely remotely something that could be called problem. It was a curse, and he was open about it from the first. My nightmares come to life, he had said, which remark thereupon initiated quite a long and detailed conversation between them. It went through all the usual stages of good-natured chiding, disbelief, ridicule, short-lived anger, at the possibility he was making fun of her, you see, toying with her, on into another kind of disbelief, argument with recourse to logic and Occam's razor, grudging acceptance, a brief lapse into incredulity, a return to the barest belief, and finally, with trust, utter acceptance that he was telling her nothing less than the truth. Remarkably, to say the least, his nightmares assumed corporeal shape and stalked the night as he slept, dreaming them up. It wouldn't have been so bad except... my nightmares killed and ate my first 4 wives, he had said. He'd saved that part for the last. But she married him nonetheless, and they were extremely happy. It was a terrific liaison for both of them. But just to be on the safe side, because he loved her very, very, very much, he took to sleeping in the lumpy Volkswagen bed at the edge of the forest. And every morning, because he was compelled to rise when the sunlight struck his face out there in the open, he would trek back to their fine home in the middle of the forest, and he would make her morning tea and heat and butter a muffin, or possibly pour her a bowl of banana nut crunch cereal, or sometimes a nice bowl of oatmeal with cinnamon or brown sugar sprinkled across the surface, and carry it into her as she sat up in bed reading or watching the home shopping channel. And for 8 years she had been absolutely safe from the nightmares that ripped and rent and savaged everything in sight. He slept at the brim of obscurity, and he was a danger to no one but himself. And whatever means he used to protect himself from those dark time sojourners, well, it was an armory kept most secret. And that was how they lived for 8 years. And every night she would go barefoot in her shift, and she would follow the 27 plugged-together extension cords, each one 30 feet long, that led from the house to his night light. And she would come to him and kiss him goodnight. And they would tell each other how happy they were together, how much every moment together meant to them. And they would kiss goodnight once more, and she would go back to the house. And he would lie reading for a time and then go to sleep. And in the night, there at the shore of fog, at the edge of the awful sea of mist, the nightmares would come and scream and tear at themselves. But they never got anywhere near Susan, who was safely in her home. So as she had done every night since they had met, she followed the extension cords down through the sweet-smelling, wind-cooled hedges and among the whispering, mighty trees to his bed. The light was on. An apple ready to be nibbled sat atop a stack of books awaiting his attention. The intaglio of a tesseract, or possibly a dove on the wing, lay in the center of a perfectly circular depression in his pillow where he had rested his head. But the bed was empty, and she went looking for him. And after a time, she found him sitting on the shore of fog, looking out over the brim of obscurity. But she heard him crying long before she saw him. The sound of his deep, heartfelt sobbing led her to him. And she knelt beside him, and he put his arms around her, and she said, "I see now that I've made you unhappy. I don't know how, but I can see that I've come into your life and made it unpleasant. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." But he shook his head and continued to shake it, to say, no, that isn't it. You don't understand. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying, because she didn't understand what it meant, his shaking his head like that, until finally he was able to stop crying long enough to say, no, that isn't it. You don't understand." "Well, then what are you crying about?" And he wasn't able to tell her for a while, because just trying to get the words out started him up all over again. But after a while, still holding her, there at the brim of obscurity, which in an earlier time had been known as the rim of oblivion, he said softly, "I'm crying for the loss of all the years I spent without you, the years before I met you, all the lost years of my life. And I'm crying that there are less years in front of me than all those lost years behind me." And out in the roiling ocean of misty darkness, they could both hear the sound of roving, demented nightmares whose voices were now, they understood, less filled with rage than with despair. Let me direct your attention to this here. It's a little banged up. It is a newspaper clipping, and it's dated February 16th, 1952. And it is photographs of the people who founded the Cleveland Science Fiction Society in 1951-52. And if you'll notice on here on the right is a pencil neck geek reading astounding science fiction. That pencil neck geek is myself at age 17. Now, the guy who did this article, Jack Warfel, came to the clubhouse and in Cleveland when I was just in high school, and he did this piece on science fiction. The article is called "They're All Ready to Visit the Man in the Moon." And it says at least 30 Clevelanders are ready to leave for the moon. Departure date sometime within the next 5 or 10 years, according to Harlan Ellison. He established the deadline following a bi-weekly evening meeting of the space-headed club members at 10217 St. Clair Avenue. Not all the members, including industrial engineers, school teachers, housewives, physicians, and college students, are essentially moon-minded. Moon-minded. You like that? Some have their sights set on Mars. This is 1952. People talk about Mars. They must be crazy, right? Others are more enthusiastic about a quick trip to Venus or a more extended fling through the Milky Way and outer space. Conversation with us a jog trot as I enter the place, blah, 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 and he gets it all the titles wrong. He doesn't know the difference between articles and stories. And then he comes down, he says, "Stephen Schulteis of Warren, Ohio, new club president, introduced me to several members, and I waded into the lunar swim." There's nothing but hyperbole and disingenuousness in all of this. The heading is "Flights of Fantasy," it says. Quote, "Interplanetary flights are in the immediate future unless there's a drastic change in world views," declared Ellison, 17, of East High School. "The flights will surely be government-sponsored." Now, let me stop for a moment. This is 1952. And I said we'd have space travel within the next 5 to 10 years, right? 5 years later, on the button, October 4th, 1957, Russia sent up Sputnik, the first successful launch of the first artificial Earth satellite. 5 years to the dot. And 12 years later, only 12 years later, we were walking on the moon. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, the Apollo Saturn 11, July 20th, 1969. We were right on. But here was this mook, this pinhead, this imbecile, doing this routine, making people who were reading science fiction look like jerks because he didn't know anything, because he was stupid, because he didn't have any information. It goes on and on and on and on like this. I want to tell you about this guy. This guy was such a jerkazoid that 5 years later, when Sputnik went up, I came back from where I was. I think I was on leave from the Army, and I came back to find this yutz so that I could point out to him, show him the article, which I still had, and show it to him and say, how does this make you feel, you pinhead? But unfortunately, he escaped my wrath because he died. My wrath, however, is in full flight and full measure now because the Sci-Fi Channel has been showing a 1-hour documentary, and I use the word documentary really loosely in this case, about the World Science Fiction Convention that was held in Anaheim over Labor Day, 1996. And it is a terrible piece of work. It's a terrible piece of work because it does the same thing that these documentaries always do. The host is a guy named Sean Donnellan. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it right or not. Sean Donnellan is an Adam Sandler wannabe. I mean, this is a guy who acts as if he's got tapioca pudding for brains. He runs around holding up a piece of cloth or you know, a wig, a fake wig, screaming at Shatner's wig, and they think this is clever. Now, I talked to the people who produced this show. It was done by Triage Entertainment. They're very nice people, and they worked hard at this. I don't blame them. They were given the assignment 3-4 days before they had to shoot it. They had to shoot an hour documentary. They didn't know who to talk to. They did not have an advisor. This show is an outsider's idea of primitive science fiction, the kind of crap that was being done by this reporter in 1952. Everyone knows about SF now. Why in the world, if you're going to be going to a science fiction, do you have conversations with Roger Corman about life on Mars? First of all, the life on Mars thing is just, you know, primitive bacteria billions of years ago. There is no life on Mars. But here's Roger Corman saying, well, when I heard this, what I want to do is make a movie about life on Mars. Ha, ha, ha. And he's making one called Mars Lives. This is crap. This is the kind of adolescent, childish stuff that should not be done. Now, nobody minds. Nobody minds if it's 60-40 entertainment as opposed to content. There's ways of doing the content stuff so that it's not boring, so that it's not dull. There are impassioned people out there. Instead of using that herky-jerky 5-second intercut pseudo-MTV chaotic style, they should have done some serious filming. Make it look serious, but they didn't. Nobody had the scene in which A.E. Van Vogt, old A.E. Van Vogt, got his award, a great and touching moment when an entire auditorium of people stood up and applauded him. They didn't cover the wonderful conversation between Joe Straczynski and Ross Pavlett on is there God? Is there an existence of God? It's all over the net now. People are downloading it so they can exchange copies of it. None of that was covered. And when I talked to Triage, they said, well, we did the best we could. We wanted to give a rounded feeling. You don't give a rounded feeling by doing the origami panel and not doing the Hugos. There were just little snippets of the Hugos and very little of the retro Hugos. It was not, in fact, a proper kind of representation of the most important science fiction event of the year. What you have got to do is start treating the medium seriously, as it is treated by most everybody in the world. Everybody knows science fiction. You don't have to do these primary level kind of things anymore. This is a disgraceful show, this Worldcon show. Everybody I know was furious about it, just off about it. And they started calling me, what are you going to say about it? And I watched it, and I'm on it myself. And I look like a jerk just like everybody else. And I said, I'll say something about it. Well, now I've said something about it. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea whether the Sci-Fi Channel will get its act together at long last after all these years or not. But I said what I had to say. Thank you for listening.